Welcome back, everyone, to the Cross to Crown podcast. I'm from like the 9th different background I've had since I been here. Josh Copeland and Doug Gooden, episode 92, and I believe that's correct. He's going to
check.
I'm almost positive I'm correct on this one, but Doug is pastor, father, husband, seminary director, ministry director, author, all those things. And
episode 93 for all those just joining us.
Oh, so close. Doug, thank you for doing another podcast with us. We're doing it a day late this year. I've had some crazy travel and family issues, and we appreciate the prayers for those that know what's going on. It's nothing really major, but it's still, when it's your children, it's major, right? And when someone says, well, appendectomy is just, it's not a serious surgery. Yeah, well, when you're the one under the knife and under anesthesia, it's pretty serious. So yeah, but we appreciate the prayers, and our little daughter's doing okay for now. So we just pray that this one sticks. Anyway, Doug, last week we had some good feedback on the Christophany, the Melchizedeks. I did go back and listen. I occasionally do that. Most of the time I hate the sound of my own voice, so I don't do that. But you did not answer my question. So I want to know, what are the couple of takes you've heard on he will come from Nazareth? That is nowhere the prophecy about Jesus that is mentioned in the New Testament that he fulfilled, that you can't find in the Old Testament. So we've got like 338 prophecies plus one or something, or whatever the number is. So what are the takes you've heard on that? Does it change anything? Does it really matter if it's not mentioned in the Old Testament? So what do you got?
I got the same thing I had last week. I got nothing. Yeah, I don't know what to do with that. Some of the takes are, at least one of them is, it's more regional, and Matthew is being a little more precise than the broader region, Bethlehem, that kind of thing. I got nothing. I don't know what to do with that exactly. Some want to make it Nazarene, which that doesn't really fit. He's not a Nazarene,
No.
Nazarite, none of this. So I don't know, man. I have to consult the esoteric scholars on that one. Someone
I don't think Jesus was anti-dancing or having a glass of wine like most Nazarenes. So I don't know if that would work or not. It's a terrible joke, and I'm sorry. So I'm curious, because one of the arguments that the classically trained apologetics will make is, if the New Testament is accurate, therefore we don't have to prove the Old Testament, because Jesus said the New Testament speaks about me, etc. That doesn't affect any of your apologetic, does it, when you come to the New Testament? Because if you can prove the New Testament, it is pretty easy to argue the accuracy of the Old Testament. I feel that's a fairly strong argumentation to make, correct?
Sure. And, it's hard because we don't have a direct quote there, but it's also the right thing to do is say, yeah, I don't know, unless we have a pretty clear answer to the question. So I don't know. There are some things that we don't know. We're 2,000 years removed from that. I'm just going to keep saying, I don't know how to deal with that one. So
yeah, it's a little difficult, I think, because again, what God has revealed to us and what he hasn't, and what he hasn't far outweighs what he has. But if we say scripture is God's word and this is him speaking to us, you and I can get into you wouldn't disagree with this even as a continuationist, right? If you want to hear God speak, open up his word and read it. So he is obviously given the stuff that he thinks we can know. And so that's sometimes I think the struggle. What does this mean? But I do take comfort in the original audience probably knew what was going on. So there is
agreed. Matthew probably knew, because I don't suppose he would have written it down if he didn't know what he was writing.
Yeah. And that comes back to the argument about why church history can be important, because you can go back. Now, obviously, just because you get closer to when Christ was around doesn't mean you're getting things right, because look at the church at Corinth and those places. They were hot messes, and some of them saw the risen Christ. So it's not like we can sit there and be like, well, they were around Jesus, so they got it right. We know just reading from scripture, that's not true. So Doug, when it comes to everything that's going on in the world from a theological standpoint, what's your take on vaccines? No, I'm kidding. There's a million. There's a million and one blog. I'm tired of that discussion, and people can go find it. But from a church standpoint, I do want to talk about that. how can a church, any church say, and I will readily admit, I got the vaccine. I felt it's the right thing to do for myself and my family. But how can any church readily say, do not come into our church unless you've been vaccinated? Like literally church in Afghanistan is having to hide and meet right now so they're not killed. And they're still meeting. I don't think they care about masks or vaccines. I'm sure if they had them, great, but they don't care. It seems insulting to me for the church that is persecuted around the world to say, well, you might get a disease that will kill you.
Yes, I see that line of thinking. I do. The problem with social media debates about this is, there's just no room for nuance. And we've talked about this before. Part of the problem is there's still so much we don't know about the vaccine, about the disease itself, about the variants. I mean, I just don't trust most of the stuff I hear. My brother and I have this debate. He is much more on the pro-mask, pro-vaccine, all that side than I am. We went home to St. Louis back in April, I think it was, or no, it was later than that. Anyway, and he and his whole family have been vaccinated. Because my family was not vaccinated, he asked us to wear masks and social distance if we were outside and all of that, which we are happy to do. He reads a certain body of literature regarding what's going on with all this stuff, and he comes to his conclusions. I read others and say, well, that sounds compelling as well. I don't know who to believe exactly here. Now, my family's all had COVID. And so we've been told by a medical professional that we are immune. We have antibodies, which makes us better equipped to be infected again than you are with the vaccine. But people disagree on that. And I tell my brother that. He says, well, the people I'm reading say, no, natural immunity is not as good, or vaccine plus natural immunity, all those things. And then, of course, all the stories of people who are getting sick and having all kinds of complications with the vaccine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So here's the thing. As a church leader, it comes down to, in my mind, how serious is this disease? If it were truly killing people in greater numbers than we've seen, if this were a real plague, now, and I don't even say that to say it's not, right? So don't read into what I'm saying there. But if you couldn't dispute it, people are falling dead in the streets, then of course, we would all agree, please don't come to our gatherings. We may not even be having gatherings. We'd be taking those kind of protocols.
This video is going to get taken down by YouTube, right? That's just
probably our first one, demonetized, even though we're not making money.
None whatsoever.
So that's the question. How serious is this? It seems to me like the body of evidence suggests that for people who are in decent health and who are not elderly, this is not a major killer. And again, I don't say that lightly. I could be wrong about that. So we've decided at our church, we are just not going to police this. We are going to let people make their decision. Our doors are open. We're going to take the risk that the disease is worse than we think it is. But I don't want to be too hard on those who make a different decision. If it's truly based out of fear and because they've only been listening to one side, and they don't even have a reason to believe other than, well, these people are saying it, that gets a little harder. So,
well, I'm with you. That's my view on it from a church standpoint. It should be up to people. I had COVID last year. I have some immunocompromised family members. We decided that the best way to make sure they, and they don't have enough. It's hard to get the antibody test. I think you have to pay for that one. I don't think that one's free. So, all the evidence does suggest that you're probably, they're saying up to a year. So but the biggest thing in this day and age that I think comes back to being a man, which we talk about, and that is learning things like cost benefit analysis, which no one seems to have any concept of these days with data, and by the way, I saw this picture yesterday. It was a meme. It was a pilot. And it said, if this guy thinks 2 + 2 + 5 = 5, we're all dead.
Right.
So it kind of matters, right? Like actual math and truth matters. And it would be nice if people just went, I'm going to look at the data and then I'm going to make a call for my family, myself. And then we don't get pharisaical in our response to others. And that's where I get annoyed on both sides of this argument. My goodness. People are standing up on a hill going, I'm right and you're wrong. And how dare you? And they're putting a you will, a hedge up around what God has allowed freedom in people to do.
But even that doesn't work, because whose data, right? What data are you going to look at? Again, I don't trust any presentation of this that I have seen. And to think they're just giving us some unbiased data that's helpful.
Well, I'm saying in your argument, though, the data could be like, let's say you're a 22-year-old person who's very healthy, 8% body fat or whatever. You are like the least likely person who would get COVID to have any even serious complications from it. Now, there's always anecdotal and outliers, right? There's a kid who dies of pancreatic cancer at 12. Awful, sad, but so rare they don't even check for it in kids, right? There's a reason the data says let's wait till people are over 40 before we start checking for that. So that's all I'm saying. I'm with you on the cost benefit analysis of things, but we're not doing that with COVID.
No, nobody. Yeah. So, I mean, this is going to sound horrible to some probably, but the data I'm trusting is what I see with my own eyes. COVID went through our church like it has the whole nation, and nobody died. We had several elderly get it, and, they were high risk. They came out of it just fine. We've had different serious levels. My family got it on the lighter side. Some others got it on the heavier side, but no one's dying of it in our situation, our presence. And I look around our neighbors and our friends and family members, and don't know anybody that's been close to death with it. Now, that's just our experience. I know there are other experiences out there. You weigh that with all the other things that could also make us sick and kill us, and think, okay, we're just not persuaded yet that it's at the level that some people say it is. But even the data you see wherever you might go, the CDC, WHO, your local favorite blogger, whatever, I don't know who to trust.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think we should question everybody. I have no problem with that. People are like, well, you can't question your doctor. Well, why not? But that's fine. But I'm also going to question the crazy YouTube guy too. I think that's fair too. I'm not going to sit there and think this guy, although oddly enough, outside of the frog thing, Alex Jones has been right about a lot of stuff. It's scary to admit. I'm kidding.
Now we're definitely canceled.
Oh my gosh, I'm kidding. People calm down. Although he was right about the aborted fetal. I'm sure you saw the story out of Pittsburgh, which is just awful and tragic and sad. And that's part of the discussion to have about some of these vaccines. And that's where the Christian side of it has become. I didn't said we weren't going to talk about it, but here we are, is the abortion issue. Moeller had a good take on it. I didn't get the Johnson & Johnson one because it is using current aborted fetal cells. The Pfizer one was from the 70s. I was like, it still seems, but I thought Moeller made a strong argument about kind of from a Genesis 50 situation, that these babies' deaths would not be in vain, and God could use them for good. I know I'm generalizing his argument. I will send you. He is. I don't know what we do with things like that. I do think it's a conscious decision. It's no new aborted cells being used by Pfizer or Moderna. Like, it's not like, now I understand the long-term argument can be, well, if they're doing it now, 30 years from now, they're going to need more.
What difference does it make whether the baby died a year ago or 40 years ago?
I understand that argument. I'm just
How does the principle change?
I don't know. But I think that is I don't know. It's just a mess right now to people have to work through these things. I know plenty of pastors who have gotten it, who are staunchly and advocately will stand out in front of a Planned Parenthood clinic, but they got the vaccine. So, it's been a tough one, I think, for people to, and vaccines in general are an interesting debate. I'm curious as to why you think the Christian community is so vocal, generally speaking, against vaccines. Is it the abortion thing? Because the autism one, or that causes whatever, I don't buy that argument from the research I've done. The only logical one I can see from a Christian standpoint is the abortion argument.
Are you talking specifically the COVID vaccine or vaccines?
All of them, pretty much vaccines in general.
Well, the COVID one, I would say, most of the arguments that I hear is just distrust that this is being forced upon us and it's all political. There's a power trip And we don't know the full extent, and it hasn't been tested long enough to really see what the ramifications are long term, which that also plays in this for me. You start injecting viruses into people, and what's going to happen to us over time.
But every vaccine at some point is experimental, right? Like the death argument doesn't necessarily work for me from the vaccine, because I look about my Aunt Chris, who's in a wheelchair. She had polio. She got polio the year the vaccine came out, but got it before the vaccine. Now, if I could tell her, you could walk for the rest of your life and get this vaccine, or, well, you're not going to die, but you're going to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life. She's like, well, give me the vaccine, right? She's 87 years old. She's had polio since she was 16. So that part about, and when the polio vaccine came out, it was experimental. So, and they made her get more after the fact because there were levels of polio that were causing problems, right? She's just paraplegic, not quadriplegic. So
sure. Talk about a CBA though, cost benefits analysis. I would look at that and say, what is the obvious risk to polio? It's devastating. It is debilitating. So am I willing to take the risk of the unknowns with this vaccine versus the known risks if I get polio? I'm saying just the opposite is true of COVID. My experience, both my family, all 5 of us, and the people I know, such as yourself and people in our church who've had it, is this is not nearly as devastating for the vast majority of people as polio is. So in that sense, the cost benefit there, I'm not willing to take the risk. This whole thing is risk management. I'm not willing to take the risk of the unknown about the effects of the vaccine as compared to the known risks, which are not universal, not exhaustive, but the known risks of COVID at this point. And then the whole question of, well, okay, that's fine for you, Doug, but what about transmitting it to others? Again, everybody I read says something different. If you're vaccinated, you can still transmit it. So that doesn't make you any better off than me in terms of being able to give to somebody else. And masks, do they work, not work, all that. I mean, this is just hard stuff.
Well, I readily admit our government's messaging has been terrible, right? Like, I mean, we can all, the people who we agree with politically are like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? So from a Christian standpoint, the love the neighbor discussion. You've done a single podcast on what that you and Chris did. And I encourage people to go back and look at the context of that and what that means to who is my neighbor, et cetera, and how to look at that. But from COVID, right? Or early on, love my neighbor is we're going to close our doors and wait. Love my neighbor is wear a mask. Love my neighbor is social distance. Love my neighbor is get a vaccine. Love my neighbor is, I don't even know what it is anymore. Stay home in Australia and never leave your house. Like what's going on there, which is scary. And we can get to that another time. It does love thy neighbor, that passage, the Good Samaritan. Does it apply here?
Yes, of course. It applies everywhere. Right. The question here is, what is loving to my neighbor? So again, there's the side of how serious is this disease? And if it's as simple as this disease is devastating, it really is a pandemic, it is a plague, and wearing a mask and staying 6 feet from you can greatly reduce the chance that I'm going to give it to you. Yes, I'm for it. But there's the other side too. If this is a politically motivated agenda, if it's propaganda, if the CDC, all the things we hear on that side, if that any of that is true, and or the other cost here is the liberty. I certainly agree with those who are claiming that the government does not readily give back power. That's obvious for all of the history of mankind, and it's true of our nation as well. And so does loving my neighbor mean I sit here and advocate and participate in something where it's going to cost the next generation great amounts of freedom that are unwarranted? That plays into it too. This is a complex question. This is hard. So yes, of course, love thy neighbor applies. Question is, how do I apply it? And I think the risk is pretty high that we are giving away freedoms that will be unloving toward future generations and even our own day. I mean, the things are moving fast.
Right. And the church, I mean, I struggle, again, to go back full circle with how we started, me saying I'm not going to meet because I'm worried about X disease when the church is being persecuted around the world, for the chance I might get something that doesn't kill me, that the statistics say I've got a 99.5% chance of surviving, depending on the age group, maybe more, maybe a little less, obviously. If you're heavier, like Heaven forbid we tell someone get in shape and be healthy. We're not doing that anymore, because then you're labeled fat phobic, which I don't even know what that means. But you know, I the people who aren't meeting because of that, I have a hard time wrapping my head around that one. Especially in a day and age with suicide rates being what they are and people depression being higher than it ever was. You know why? Because we're called to be communal people in general. Like, even if you're a part of a church, we're called to gather. That's how societies happen and cities happen. And we're not doing it. It's part of the celebration of the individual versus, you know, it's fixing all the world's problems. Here we are, but go ahead.
Yeah, again, I would just caution us all from making sweeping generalizations. I think no doubt there are some churches, some church leaders that are just giving into fear and blindly following propaganda, and they're probably in sin to shut their doors and to not welcome people in. There are probably others that have weighed it all and are convinced this really is the right thing to do, not because of fear, but for, you know, before God, they believe it's right. Yeah. And, you know, we have to give some room for them to disagree with us on some of those things as well. So we just need to be careful. This is where we must not follow the world and just jump into the false dichotomies, and there's only two ways to look at it, this way or that way. No, I tell you, as a church leader who's going to give an account to the Lord and to the people for these decisions, these are hard things. We went back, started meeting last summer, earlier than almost all the other churches here in Colorado Springs, and that weighed heavy on us because we believed it was the right thing to do. But you know, if we're wrong and COVID sweeps through our church and dozens of people die, hundreds of people die, yeah, that's going to weigh on our conscience, kind of thing. So it's hard all the way around. Yeah.
What do you make of, I think tying in with COVID, we've talked about Romans 13 some, although not a ton, I think. Where does, because the libertarian view has become very prominent in Christian circles these days, which at times is borderline anarchist. And my understanding of Romans 13 is correct. The government's sole purpose ultimately is to serve God, and therefore by serving God serves people. And when it's not doing that, the argument I've heard is we have a right to defy it. We have a right to defy tyrants. We have a right to ignore what the government is mandating if what they're doing is not serving God. Discernment, though, comes from one group says, oh, they're honoring God, or I'm honoring God by honoring my government. You know, Jesus didn't resist arrest. He still went to prison willingly because the government took him there, even though he was innocent. So what are we doing with Romans 13 in this context? And I'm getting ready to study that with the New Covenant School of Theology, by the way. But anyway, just curious.
So the way you just framed that, what government obeys God?
None of them perfectly. There's no such thing as no one has ever obeyed God. Not even God's people obeyed God perfectly as a government. So
if that's our standard and that's our explanation of Romans 13, then we can disobey every government that's ever existed, right? Yeah, that can't be the standard. They are Paul says the government is a tool, an instrument of God, but it doesn't say they serve God. Well, yes, they serve God unwittingly. Most governments do not serve him on purpose. Right. They bear the sword. They are to punish evildoers and commend those who do what is right. But the scripture does not give us the freedom to rebel just because we don't like the laws, even if the government is going beyond what mandate the Lord has given them. Paul, when he wrote that, was living under a tyrannical government. They had an emperor. And he didn't say we could just go do whatever we want to whenever they pass laws that we don't like. Just to anticipate a question that may come, and we are not going to get into it this time, maybe ever, because it's a hard one, but the American Revolution, that is not as cut and dry as some want to present it, in my mind, at least. That, of course, the early colonists had the right to revolt. I'm not saying they didn't. I'm just saying if we just assume they did, you need to dig into the problem a little bit more, because it's a harder question.
I'm surprised you went that. I thought you'd be like, no, they didn't have, because I've a lot of people in the Reformed community, although American was still kind of a Puritan society at the time to some degree. And you can read some writings. A lot of them struggled with is what we're doing right?
Right.
So yeah, it wasn't cut
And
and
that's
dry to them.
And that's what I'm saying. We
Yeah.
act like there's no struggle here. Of course, no, it's hard. It's hard to really come down on one side of that or the other. I see both sides, and I find some discomfort in both viewpoints. In general, today, I believe the government, the United States government, has gone way beyond the parameters that God has given the government. They are not our nannies. They are not to make sure that we all achieve our greatness. They're not supposed to be our educators. They're not supposed to be our healthcare providers, any of those things. And yet here we are. They control more and more of our life every day. I believe that's sinful. I don't believe that gives us the right to rebel because the government is doing things. And especially in a republic, we can have influence and we can vote, and we are voting these people in. And so we're getting what we deserve. And the fact that Christians and conservatives have not done a good job of fighting legally with votes and things. The fact that we've let the government take over schooling, the teachers unions are maybe the biggest influencer of the entire nation. And we see that especially right now with COVID stuff. So it's a mess all the way around, man. But we need to be very careful when we start giving Christians the freedom to revolt.
Yeah. And I think, to say there, as we talked about one of our first podcasts you and I did, culture matters. And this is proof of that because, again, domestic policy and foreign policy affect us directly. It affects Christians around the world, the U.S.'s role, like what I keep bringing up Afghanistan. You look what's happening to Christians there.
Mm-hmm.
Bad decisions are affecting Christians abroad. And so, yes, it matters who you vote for. Yes, it matters how you engage in culture and things like that. But certainly our attitudes need to be one in how we engage too. I think you brought that up when you taught your series, and I still recommend people go do it. Understanding the times. You started with a passage on understanding others, having an attitude of Christ, towards others, and the attitude of one that reflects Christ in our response versus the Twitter world of snark and things like that. We can't sit there and say we are Christians, and then the world knows enough of the Bible to go, well, that doesn't sound like a Christian response, right? And at times they're probably right. So we need to watch our response.
Yeah. At the same time, short of taking up arms, where that level comes, that's pretty hard. Is there a place to rebel against unjust laws in a civil disobedience is what we call it, right?
Right. Yes.
In fact, I think I saw an article someone put out last week. Was it Doug Wilson who had the article about lying false vaccine cards?
Yes.
I haven't read the article, so I don't want to assume what he's saying there. But that whole question is an interesting one, and I don't think that's cut and dried. There's somebody like, oh, you can never, no, that's complete deceit and lie. Okay, but I know Doug Wilson's view well enough to assume where he's coming from, and I can see the argument on that side as well. Again, for the benefit of people, and you're not harming anyone like you're taking up arms. I'm just saying these are hard, complex issues, and we also have to always keep in mind, as we allow the government to keep going down the path they're on, how can you stand by loving your neighbor and just let that happen? That weighs on me as well.
Yeah, silence is many times the sin of omission, if you want to call it that, right? Like we do need to speak up. And I joked like 4 or 5 weeks ago, well, if they go this vaccine passport thing, the guy who made a ton of money creating fake IDs in college is about to make a ton of money making fake. And sure enough, someone got arrested selling what looked like real, legit vaccine cards. And here we are. It's just, you create a market when you force it.
You're just jealous that you didn't jump on that sooner. I know.
No kidding. Like I could have, we got an HOA bill the other day. I'm like, what is this new fee? So yes, I need can we at least submit the HOA? We shouldn't have to submit to them. I don't think Romans 13 had HOAs coming in mind at all. Oh, they're evil. Doug, I just want to take a moment to say we really appreciate you taking the time to speak truth in this time. It's not easy, especially, people think, well, my job is making me do things I don't want to do, or I'm nervous, DEI training, whatever it is. Some of it's better than others. I will admit that. Some of it acknowledges like No, we're not trying to whitewash history. We just want you to understand people have different experiences and points of view, which, okay. But in this day and age, you are coming along and speaking truth and doing it with love and not, I think you said this last week, we're not dismissing anyone's personal experience. We are acknowledging, though, how does that reflect Christ? How does that, in the grand scheme of things, what is our response to those experiences? Not, I don't know. I just want to say I appreciate that and thank you for standing for truth in what has been a difficult time, just in general for Christians, but I think for you and for me, and I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to take the time to say thank you. And if people want to pray for you, I would encourage them to do that. Pray for us, pray for your pastors. Pastors are attacked on the daily, and I don't think we realize it. Sometimes I just heard a couple of messages on Satan's subtle schemes. Sometimes it's really subtle. Sometimes it's overt in your face. And I would just encourage people, please pray for your pastors, your elders, put good people around them. Even if you're not an elder, just walk up to your pastor after the Sunday sermon. Don't give the, oh, that was great. They know you may not mean that because you say that every week, but go up to them like, hey, let me pray for you. I just thank you for what you're doing. I would encourage people to do that. So.
Well, thanks, brother. And I would add to that, strive for unity and peace. The enemy is doing a great job of dividing Christians and getting us to fight against one another instead of working through our differences. And man, he's making inroads there. We need to be people who are willing to let love cover a multitude of sins and come and disagree in love. And it doesn't mean we shy away from voicing our opinions and working through it together. But man, when the enemy can get Christians to be the instruments of attack against other Christians, he wins and we all lose. So I would agree. Pray for your pastors, encourage them, but also watch your own attitudes. And are you striving for peace? We all need to be doing that.
Yeah, and Satan doesn't care if you're morally good or not. He cares if you're honoring Christ, and that's what Satan doesn't care if you're helping old ladies across the street. That's not his. He wants you to get your eyes off of Christ, and so we encourage people to look to Christ. And I don't think we think enough about. We can talk about this sometime. Satan and how he does try and distract us, and he has basically one scheme, but it works. It's worked since the beginning of time. So I would encourage people, get in God's word, pray, and encourage your pastors. I will say one funny story about the people who come up to the pastors after. My buddy Brian Vickers was training. Brian's a professor at Southern now, great dude. If you ever want to get into the justification debate, he has written a good book on it. But he was training, and Tom Smith was in the balcony, and Brian was taking forever to finish. And Tom's just up there going, wrap it up. Tom's the lead pastor. Brian gets done. And this old lady comes up to him. It's like, oh, Pastor Vickers, that was such a sweet message. Thank you. And Tom taps him on the shoulder. That woman hasn't been able to hear for 30 years. So pastors can be a little bit jaded when you come up to them and tell them, I really enjoyed it. If you did, that's great. But just remember, sometimes they know. They say that to me every week. They left and went to the bathroom for 30 minutes. But anyway, so. Well, Doug, what we want to encourage people is to, especially in light of the current culture, always, and in light of Satan's subtle schemes, is to do what?
Live intentionally, Christ obsessed in all things.